A very good afternoon to you, Lord Hain, and thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with the scope of the UK's Bribery Act.
Well, it's quite serious in the sense that any British-based business person, say, for example, a board member on a corporate, which is doing business in anywhere else in the world, including South Africa, if that company gets involved in bribery or takes kickbacks or gets involved in any of the kind of things that happened under President Zuma especially, and the Gupta brothers, though there are other examples, sadly, of corruption still going on in South Africa, but that was when it reached its height under the state capture phenomenon, then those British companies should have been prosecuted, British-based companies. For example, KPMG, the international auditors, have got a London headquarters. So have McKinsey, so have the banks HSBC, Standard Chartered, and Bank of Baroda, and there are others. They were all up to their necks in the corruption, either facilitating money laundering in the case of the banks through Dubai or Hong Kong in the main, turning a blind eye to the Guptas, moving billions of money out of South Africa, sometimes laundering it back in and spending it in whatever the way they wanted, stealing from South African taxpayers through Eskom and other state-owned enterprises, and in other ways from the government. So that money was stolen from South Africa. It went into the international financial system. Those corporates that I've named were involved in it, and I think they should have been prosecuted. I called for that in the case of HSBC, specifically in the British Parliament, in the House of Lords in the end of 2017, and continued to do so into 2018, and the Financial Conduct Authority, which is one of the investigative agencies in Britain for this sort of thing, did pursue my complaint. I introduced a whistleblower in respect of HSBC to them, but I've not been able to get any satisfactory answer as to what has actually happened.
And that was going to lead to the next question, that if this is such an important piece of legislation, why is it that we have not seen the corrupter being prosecuted here?
Well, there may be arguments about whether the London-based corporate, say for KPMG and McKinsey, which have both admitted that their South African executives did all sorts of really bad things and effectively got involved and were complicit in the corruption, because that was exposed by the Daily Maverick and the eNCA and others at the time. So there's no question as to who's guilty. But I had a very interesting response when I referred the international law firm Hogan Lovells, which is South African based as well, which was also up to its neck in it, particularly in whitewashing what was going on under Tom Moyane in the South African Revenue Service, whitewashing corruption there in a report that they did. What they then said when I referred them to the London Legal Regulatory Authority was that, oh no, they had nothing to do in London with the South African Hogan Lovells, based in Johannesburg. Their link was only for branding purposes. So they wriggled out of it that way, a classic lawyer's body swerve. Whereas actually, if you look at them, their international operations, if you look at their websites, you follow them in the media, they're an international law firm and they market themselves as such. And if you go to them in Johannesburg, you can get their London lawyers to act for you if you want to do something in London legitimate. So I suspect there was a lot of that going on. But also I blame the British authorities and the British government for not taking action, because my point all along, as also in the evidence I gave to the Zondo Commission in November 2019, was that the corruption and the state capture, which so damaged South Africa and has left it bankrupt financially, could not have happened without the private sector playing ball and without international corporates, some of which are well known and I've just named in this interview again. It took two to tango, and they should have been prosecuted as well, in my view.
Absolutely. It takes two to tango. It would appear that international corporates are acting with impunity where this is concerned. South Africa is not the exception to the rule here. There's other countries around the world where this is going on. The question then becomes, is there anything that can be done?
Well, I think that the South African authorities should continue to demand of the British government much more than they have. And we've got to keep agitating about this. You know, state capture has left deep scars on South Africa. South Africa wouldn't be facing the vaccine and COVID crisis to the extent that it has had to, with an impoverished treasury and depleted resources, were it not for the Zuma Gupta 10 years of state capture and corruption and money laundering. And so I think the international community has a lot to answer for. The Dubai authorities, for example, through which a lot of the money was laundered by the Guptas and by the Zumas through Dubai, and the same happened in Hong Kong. The Guptas actually have a property in Dubai. Nobody's done anything about that. It was bought with the proceeds of the looting in South Africa. So the international community, and not just these corporates, but they are obviously in the firing line. The international community has a lot to answer for. You cannot deal with this international corruption and money laundering with trillions of dollars, so many more trillions of rand being laundered around the world, unless you get the international enforcement authorities and the government acting determinedly. And in that respect, just one of the enforcement authorities in Britain, the National Crime Agency, complained to the government that it needed an extra £2.7 billion. An extra £2.7 billion. I mean, multiply that by 20 to get the billions of rand involved. In its budget to be able to do its job of rooting out this kind of corruption and organised crime seriously. And if you look across the world, and South Africa as well, but internationally in the main, the enforcement agencies, the Serious Fraud Office in Britain, the the Financial Conduct Authority, the National Crime Agency, do not have the resources to tackle the problem. So there are good laws like the Bribery Act that I mentioned and we've discussed, but actually they aren't enforced properly.
It makes you wonder of their relevance. Shying away from that, perhaps on coronavirus-related news, we received our first batch of vaccines last week in the country, and the United Kingdom has been vaccinating. Just maybe an update in terms of how the vaccine rollout has been going in your country.
Well, to its credit, it's the one thing they've done in this COVID crisis, Britain has done and Boris Johnson's government has done very well. Vaccinations are going ahead on an increasing rate, and millions have been vaccinated already, I think over 10 million. So it is working very well in Britain. The rest of the COVID crisis has been dreadfully managed by the Boris Johnson government. So we have the highest rate of casualties and infection per head of population in the world. But I'm worried about the vaccine nationalism. You know, it's all very well for British-based citizens like me to have the advantage of vaccination, particularly those who are older, who've been vaccinated at the moment. But what about right across the world? Because nobody is safe in this world until everybody is safe. Until everybody's been vaccinated. If I'm vaccinated in Britain, it doesn't help me that South Africans haven't been vaccinated. So there should have been much more international cooperation and much more support from countries like Britain and countries in the European Union and in the United States, and at least President Joe Biden is trying to do this, whereas Donald Trump didn't, to support countries right across the world, including South Africa. We can't tackle and manage this pandemic in an acceptable way. It's not going to go away. We're going to have to live with this for a while unless we all act together.
Absolutely. Perhaps a final thought in terms of the situation in Myanmar with the military taking over there.
Well, it's terrible. And I think every South African should think back to our own history of the anti-apartheid struggle, especially in the 1980s, because what the people of Myanmar are now facing from this military junta that has staged a coup and swept aside the managed democratic system that it had, and put Aung San Suu Kyi into confinement again, and it's their police and their army are shooting down protesters. That's what happens to anti-apartheid protesters under the apartheid police state, except it's worse in Myanmar now. So I think every South African who loves freedom and liberty should be backing the people of Myanmar, standing up against the junta, very bravely, confronting police and army face to face, and risking being mowed down by this merciless junta. And the international community should be putting much more pressure on the generals to pull back, or else there'll be consequences for them.
Lord Peter Hain, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.